Hi, thank you all for coming. My name is Mark Feldman. I am with Hugh Taylor, co-founder of the Center of Space Piracy, Crime, and Governance. And this webinar, which we believe is a first in exploring the role of science fiction and piracy and crime and governance in space, is also co-presented by the Center of Space Law. Basically, that is founded by Andrea Bernardi. So we believe this. I'm very grateful that you have taken time from your schedule to join us, and I hope that you will find this webinar edifying as well as fun. And I think that this is a good time for me to introduce my co-founder of the center, Hugh Taylor, who will give you a little more insight into this, and then hopefully Drea will have something good to say as well.
Yes, Mark. So it's actually a Space Beach Law Lab. Andrea Bernardi is our co-sponsor today. And we're going to turn it over to James Cambias in a second, but just super quick. Please try and mute yourselves if you're not. I may mute you if I hear noise. We are recording today, so this will be available to view later. And want to express our appreciation to Drea for co-sponsoring today. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to James. Oh, one final thing: if you have a question, you can enter it in the chat box, and the panelists will try to get to them as they can. Okay.
All right. Good morning, everyone. So yes, this is the webinar on space sci-fi and space piracy, how imagination can shape policy. And we have a killer of a panel here. We've got Jeffrey Landis, we have Laura Montgomery, we have Alan Steele, and we have Walter John Williams. My name is Jim Cambias. I'm going to let everybody give their own brief introduction so that if they want to puff anything, they can puff it now. So, Jeff, why don't you start out?
Okay. Hello, everybody. I'm Jeffrey Landis, and I'm actually both a science fiction writer, but also a scientist and engineer working for NASA. So I spend some of my time thinking about wild ideas. And after I think about wild ideas, I have to decide whether they're appropriate for NASA or appropriate for science fiction, or sometimes appropriate for both. So I think I'm going to see if I can bring a little bit of real world rocket science into the discussion of space piracy. One of the things that I've been doing recently at NASA is I'm part of a spacecraft design group. So we do engineering of future space missions. And so I've been learning a lot about how space missions are put together. I have actually written a couple of stories of science fiction that have involved space pirates. So maybe I'll mention one or two of them once we get to talking about piracy.
Wonderful. Laura, would you like to introduce yourself? You will have to unmute. Laura?
Sorry, I was on mute and bad at getting off of it. So my name is Laura Montgomery. I'm a space lawyer and a science fiction writer. I worked for the Federal Aviation Administration's Office of the Chief Counsel for a little over 2 decades with the rocket folks in the Commercial Space Office. So I helped with legislation, regulations, enforcement, all sorts of issues. I got to go to the UN, to the legal subcommittee of the Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space, and have been writing about the Outer Space Treaty since I left. Also, I've testified to Congress 2 or 3 times on the meaning of regulations and the treaties. So that's my space lawyer hat. On my science fiction side, I've written space opera and what I call legal science fiction, bourgeois legal science fiction. And my most recent short story in that vein is Took Their Wages, which is about whether you would calculate the salary of crew going close to light speed at the time lapsed on Earth or the subjective time they experienced while gone. And so that's my latest title out. But my next book is called Planting Life, and it's very near future science fiction where we're looking at the road to Mars has to start somewhere. It might as well be Central Virginia. It's a young adult science fiction.
Thank you. Alan, what are you up to nowadays?
Well, what I'm up to is I just got through an incredibly busy time. I wrote over this last year 4 books at once. I'm finally sort of coming down from that. One of those books I wrote is a novel that's currently making the rounds of New York publishing called Capricorn. And it's a fusion of science fiction and espionage, and has to do, in some small degree at least, with space piracy. And that's only the most recent time that I've written about it. I'll mention later on another book. One of my early novels has something to do with this also. I've written 25 novels and over 150 short stories. Before doing that, I was a journalist working in Washington, D.C., and for a while covered space on Capitol Hill. Some years later, in 2001, I came back to Washington, D.C., this time to actually testify before Congress in hearings on before the House Subcommittee on Space Science and Astronautics, hearings on the future of space exploration. And one of the other books that I'm currently working on now is my other great interest is the history of science fiction. I'm now working on a book called How the Galaxy Was Won, a history of space opera. And so part of my presentation today will come in part from that research.
Thank you. Walter John Williams, if you'd like to give everyone a bit of background. And,
right. Yeah. Just as a preface, I'm experiencing some dropout when other people are talking here. So if you ask me a question and I don't respond, ask it again, because I probably just didn't hear it the first time. It's not COVID brain fog. It's just a technical problem. But anyway, yes, I'm Walter, earning my living as a full-time writer for 46 years now, and I've written over 40 books, most of them science fiction. But what is perhaps relevant to this discussion is that I started out writing historical fiction with a series called The Privateers and Gentlemen, and it dealt with a New England nautical/naval family with a background in privateering. And privateering and piracy had a certain amount of overlap. So I was pretty much a very competent lay historian of the age of fighting sail. And as for my current work, probably my most popular stuff these days is a series called the Praxis series, 8 books so far. And it is a mixture of space opera, military science fiction, and soap opera. And one critic said it was as if Jane Austen had decided to write space opera, and it wasn't quite what I intended when I wrote it, but I'll take it.
Take the win.
You know, Jane Austen, sure, thank you. And another series I'm working on is the Quillifer series, which is fantasy set in a analog of the Northern European Renaissance. So, you know, the time of Sir Francis Drake and all of that. It has quite a lot of nautical stuff in it. So if you're interested in the nautical stuff, you might take a look at that.
Well, compared to these people, I seem like an amateur. I've only written 7 novels, although I'm nearly finished with an 8th. My name is James Cambius. I write science fiction, as probably can guess. My latest book is The Miranda Conspiracy, which came out earlier this year. And I thought we would get started if Walter wants to kick things off by giving us a little historical grounding and some definitions, I guess, about piracy and how it happened in the past, and which of those aspects were contingent, which ones were universals to piracy.
Right. Well, we've had piracy ever since there were boats and greedy people came together for the first time. But I'm going to be talking mainly about the golden 18th, early 18th century. And that was when piracy kind of exploded across the world, beginning in the Caribbean and then expanding outward. Now, one of the things I've learned is that pirates of the past encountered many of the same problems as any hypothetical space pirates of the future. And they had their own ways of solving them. One thing is that most pirates in the age of piracy were not technically pirates. A pirate is a sea warrior who is out for himself, and presumably will attack anyone and is in it for the money. Most pirates in the age of piracy were privateers, which is a legal form of near piracy. All right, in order to be a privateer, you would have to get a privateering commission from your government. And then you would bond yourself by handing over a rather large, surprisingly large amount of cash, so that if you were caught misbehaving, the government could confiscate that. And most of the commissions in this period were against Spain. Spain had the largest empire in the world and the wealthiest, and there were all of these treasure ships crossing the Atlantic to Europe, and everyone wanted a piece of that. So basically, it was sort of everyone against Spain in a whole series of wars. But, if a privateer had a commission from, say, France, and France made peace with Spain, then the privateer would get a commission from Holland or Britain or some other country and carry on. It was only when everyone was at peace with Spain that the number of actual pirates exploded. They preferred to operate under cover of law whenever possible. And, if peace was declared, the privateers had a private warship. The privateers had a private warship outfitted. They had a trained crew. And the number of Spanish ships in the Gulf of Mexico was either the same or increased. So, as I said, pirates will always seek legal cover. In the classic period, they had privateering commissions that made what they did at least a little bit legal. As pirates, if captured. That's the theory. Now, the Spanish didn't see the point of all this, the distinction between pirates and privateers. They just saw people plundering them. And so they tended to hang them no matter what. Okay. But as an example, Sir Francis Drake circumnavigated the globe with a small fleet, took Spanish ships, sacked Spanish towns, and he did it all in peacetime. And he did have a privateering commission from Queen Elizabeth, but he kept it secret for the whole voyage. He had it locked away. But when he got back to Plymouth, Elizabeth's share of the plunder, because the government got a piece of your privateering income, doubled. Anyway, Elizabeth's share doubled England's income for 1581. Had that much. And the Queen impounded all charts and records of the voyage and made them state secrets. And she had Sir Francis Drake knighted, but she had a French diplomat perform the ceremony. And these are attempts to achieve some kind of deniability. And in Drake's case, it failed because it was difficult to hide a giant train of silver ingots making its way. And anybody could see that. And this was such a devastating plundering expedition that Spain had no choice but to respond and to declare war. But at least in the war that followed, which included the Spanish Armada and the English Armada and the Second Spanish Armada and all of that, Elizabeth was able to afford a much bigger navy. So I am thinking, how would, since pirates are always trying to operate under cover of law and with a certain amount of deniability, how would you maintain deniability in the space age? Space programs are large and expensive and difficult to hide. And if they went out to plunder, what could they plunder that would make it worth all that expense? Okay, now they could be after total control of space. Okay, it's a possible goal, but it's not. But that's something a national navy would attempt, not a pirate. But there is one source of deniability that occurs to me. They're known as billionaires. Now, I think we have 4 or 5 private space programs in our country run by billionaires, and another one run by a very highly leveraged Brit. And just by the way, how would you feel if 5 Russian oligarchs had their own space program? Okay, or 5 Chinese billionaires. You bet we'd see that as a threat. And I expect that's how other countries see our billionaires. By the way, there is one Russian billionaire who has his private space program. He has already declared himself Emperor Mars. So there you go. Now, if one of our billionaires engages in some space piracy, allegedly on his own account, okay, we deny that our government had anything to do with it. Now, if you choose to believe it, everything is fine. If you choose not to believe it, that means you're at war. And maybe you're not ready for war right then. So you just sort of have to suck up the loss and deal with it. Deniability can be useful, at least for a time. Now, privateers could also use friendly ports to refit their ships, gather supplies, and sell their plunder. But that freedom was denied to actual pirates because they would be hanged on sight. So they had to improvise. Ships need bases and a lot of downtime, and that's whether they're wooden ships or spaceships. So you need someplace to refit your ship. I'm sure that my colleagues will have some ideas of that. But actually setting up a pirate fleet is an expensive proposition, and so is setting up a space harbor. And a pirate base, once discovered, is very vulnerable. Another issue is that pirates are in it for the money. So where are the pirates going to spend their loot? They're going to have to come down and buy consumer goods at some point. Otherwise, what's the point? So I'm kind of dubious about a lot of near future piracy on that regard, organized piracy. But I can see one thing. Let us say that one of our superpowers, China, for example, spends a lot of money, builds a space fleet, is trying to dominate near space. And then the demographic time bomb goes off in China, and their country falls into civil disorder, civil war, what have you. And you've got this space fleet sitting up in space, waiting. Basically they can't come home, but they're full of talented officers and really dedicated crew. And they need to make a living and they need to resupply. So what they could do is basically blackmail the entire Earth. If you're going to send us some fuel, unless you want all of your communication satellites shot down, that's an offer that they could make. And that is the one doing pirate type things. So anyway, if there are any questions, feel free to address me.
Well, I think we'll try to save questions for the end.
Okay.
After we've had some more background stuff, and then when we've put forth some scenarios. I guess yeah, probably ought to be the next one up so that you can give us some background on what the environment of that space pirates would be operating in might be.
Yeah, well, thanks. Yes, of course, like everybody else here, have read hundreds, maybe thousands of science fiction books about space piracy. But the more I learn about space, the more I think, wow, people try to pretend that space piracy would be like naval piracy, but space is very, very different from the ocean. We use the word spaceships, and that means that mentally we think of it, oh, it's like a ship. But that's misleading. Spaceships are very, very different in many, many ways from ocean ships. If you're thinking back to the golden age of piracy and the Spanish Main and the Pirates of the Caribbean, this was an era of time when the larger a ship is, the faster it is. So the biggest ships were also the fastest ships. In space, it's almost the opposite. The smaller you are, the faster you can move. So spaceships in possibly even pirate ships would be likely to be as small as they possibly can be so they can go fast. Spaceships, to achieve any sort of distance, are mostly fuel. When you look at something like a Saturn V taking off, about 2% of that Saturn V was the actual crew and the part that did the mission. The rest were giant fuel tanks. So that gives you the question, where do you refuel your pirate ship? Well, you possibly need a base, but let's think about that. Another factor of space is that it's easy to damage things in space. It's very, very easy to be destructive because anything moving a few kilometers per second has more energy than a bomb. So that actually means it's far easier to damage something than it is to actually board it and take away the loot. But it also means that if you have a pirate base, it's vulnerable. Uh, any pirate base can be attacked fast. So that's a interesting thought. But the real problem with space piracy, the real thing is that makes space piracy different from naval piracy is how do you escape with the loot? Space is utterly transparent. In the golden age of piracy, it was easy. You sail in over the horizon, you make your attack on the ship, you grab the loot, and then you vanish over the horizon and you're gone. Nobody can see you. But there is no horizon in space. If you look at visual science fiction, oh, well, you go hide in a nebula. Well, the beautiful pictures you see from Hubble are a little bit misleading. Nebulas are not like dense fogs. They really enhance those pictures to make them beautiful. But a typical nebula, the Crab Nebula, any part of it is far more transparent than the Earth's atmosphere. It only looks beautiful because, well, there's thousands of astronomical units of it. Uh, you also, in science fiction, tend to hide out in the asteroid belt. Oh, there's so many rocks there. You'll just be another rock. They'll never find us. Well, you're a rock that's glowing in the infrared, of course. Uh, but also, asteroid belts don't look like the asteroid belts you see in Star Wars. If you're on one particular asteroid, chances are you will never see another asteroid with the naked eye in your lifetime. Asteroids are few and far apart. So the question is, how do you do stealth in space? How do you disappear? Well, there are so many ways to look that once they know where to look, you're going to be found. You're going to have an infrared signature. You're going to have an optical signature. And if you paint yourself, the more black you paint yourself, the harder it is to mask your infrared signature. So stealth would be critical to space piracy. It's very, very hard to do in space. You can probably mask yourself from one particular direction. If you know where the telescopes that are looking for you, if you know where the radars are, if you know where they're coming from, you can hide from that direction, but you'll be visible from other directions. So when you think about space piracy, you need to think, oh, this will be very, very different in space. It's not like naval warfare. It's not with a ship of the line uh, cruising up to a target and firing broadsides until they surrender. Uh, it is fast. It's fast moving. If you're having a battle in space, the chances are that the time between when you can see the other ship visually and when they can kill you is fractions of a second. So we should rethink piracy in space and say, well, it's not like piracy on the ocean. Well, take it away.
Thank you. So in addition to the physical environment of space, there's of course the whole legal environment, which Walter touched on a little, that enables piracy or at least makes it more or less feasible. And we have Laura Montgomery, who is, as she said, she's does space law. Would you like to tell us a little about what the legal obstacles to space piracy are for anyone in the audience who wants to take up a career in the
Sure. Thank you. I'm happy to do that. I have some slides and just three. I think Hugh or Mark was going to put those up. But in the meantime, so I want to address three interesting legal questions with regard to space piracy. One of which is, and I'm an American lawyer, so this is all going to be very US centric. But the first one is jurisdiction. And you might want to ask, well, what is jurisdiction and why do we care about it? Well, it's a legal concept used to describe a state's right to take action or exercise control over someone or some activity. In other words, to make and enforce its laws with respect to a particular person, thing, or event. Originally, jurisdiction was a territorial matter, and because, a government has to be able to exercise control over its territory. That's just a matter of common sense. But with all the international trade, people going back and forth, activities on the high seas, jurisdiction now is not just over one's territory. So you'll see that in the Outer Space Treaty, Article 6 tells the countries who signed the treaty that they are responsible for the acts of their nationals in outer space and have to authorize and supervise them. So, but because there is a presumption against extraterritorial effect of a nation's laws, in other words, we're not going to apply US law in Spain, and this presumption, I would say, extends extraterrestrially as well. Congress has to pass a law for our laws to apply outside of the United States, including in space. And the good news is, for people who are worried about pirates, that Congress does say that we can exercise jurisdiction over crimes committed in space. And so they've amended back in the 1980s. This was how prescient they were. They amended the Title 18, the Criminal Code, to include a new definition in the special maritime and territorial jurisdiction of the United States to include outer space. And so if someone violates a federal statute that says it applies to this special jurisdiction, then you can go after them. So one of these federal statutes perhaps might address robbery, arson, theft, kidnapping. These are all bad things. And if that statute says it it applies outside the United States to the special jurisdiction, then you could say that's how we're going to apply our laws to the pirates. Because, we don't want people thinking it's just the Wild West out there. We probably can go after them. Now, it's not just like any old pirates anywhere. These are pirates who might come after a vehicle used or designed for flight or navigation in space. So the space shuttle is clearly such an object. And also, that vehicle has to be on a registry maintained by the State Department under the Outer Space Treaty and the Registration Convention. And so we've seen these registered objects have included space transportation systems, lots of satellites, and so you would get the shuttle. Perhaps you would get the International Space Station. But the International Space Station is interesting because it is subject to something called the Intergovernmental Agreement, where criminal activity is indeed addressed, but mostly in the context of, we have all these different nationalities on the ISS, and they, one of them might, murder someone else or steal their stuff or do something else that we consider wrong. And so the rules govern the relationships between them. It doesn't really address space piracy. So I think we would have to turn to this Title 18 in order to go after the pirates if we wanted to, because I'm assuming these pirates are outsiders coming at the space station. So we've got that. And then the second topic I'd like to discuss, just because I think it's important for space piracy, is space property rights. And there's three parts to that. And some of them are really controversial. And you will hear any of us space lawyers give you different answers, and some are not controversial at all. So the first one I want to talk about is objects. You own a satellite, you put your satellite in orbit, and under US law, that is your satellite. And even the Outer Space Treaty in Article 8 recognizes that ownership in an object does not change merely because of its presence in space. This is an interesting little thing because I've heard government officials say, well, this means that it's yours forever. So maybe the laws of salvage don't apply. I'm sure that any officer of the Department of Defense would say, absolutely, these laws that is ours forever. And no, you do not get to salvage it because of national security considerations. So anyone going after that could be accused perhaps of piracy because they're engaged in robbery or theft. I'm not a criminal lawyer. I don't know the difference between the two things. I just know they're different. So those are considerations. And the objects are the non-controversial ones. Then the one that was controversial until about 2015, and then remained controversial a little bit longer, was mined resources. So let's say you go to the moon and start mining helium-3 or platinum group minerals or whatever else you're looking for. You set it up with your robots and you start chugging away. Prior to 2015, some pirate might say, and I was really interested to hear earlier that that everyone tried to do things under color of law, because I kept thinking, well, how can we make this legal for the pirates? Which is weird because I'm a goody-goody and I shouldn't be taking the side of the pirates. But here they are. They could say, hey, no one owns property in space. You can't mine stuff. It's not yours. Well, in 2015, the Congress of the United States passed a law saying it would recognize rights in extracted resources, which is a fancy word for stuff you've mined. And they didn't want to say mining because of the value of water ice on the moon. So you might go and extract water ice, but we wouldn't call that mining. So let's use another word that confuses everything. Yes, you could mine water ice. I don't know why we wouldn't say that. But anyway, so after the US passed that law, it got joined by a number of other countries, including Luxembourg, Japan, the United Arab Emirates, and someone I'm forgetting, I apologize. but at least 4 other countries have adopted the same position, and it's like taking fish from the sea. The fisherman fishes, catches a fish, it's his. You mine something on the moon, it's yours. We recognize those rights. And then lastly, my favorite is land. There is a lot of controversy over this one, but if we look at Articles 1 and 2 of the Outer Space Treaty, which is the source of a lot of what I, who have a certain perspective, call confusion, and other people would say the source of our position, lots of people say that you can't own land. I think that countries can't own land in space, but Article 1, which is the source of, oh, it belongs to everyone, it's a global commons. When you parse through Article 1 of the Outer Space Treaty and fight your way through the commas, you will see that it is the exploration and use that is the province of all mankind. Secondly, Article 2 bars national appropriation of outer space. Well, it doesn't bar private appropriation. Then there's lots of arguments, and I have slides that go on for an hour about that, but I'll just move on from there. But what it boils down to is the language is a prohibition on national appropriation, not private appropriation. So those are 3 areas where you could say if someone comes in and takes your satellite, takes your platinum group minerals, or tries to take the land you put your data center on, that you are a pirate. So lastly, because we were asked to think of scenarios, I came up with one where the pirates, maybe they have me as their lawyer, or evil Laura as their lawyer, and what they do is they say, let's go pretend that we're in trouble because of all of the issues that Jeff brought up. How are you even going to attack a space station? We're going to go up to one of these private space stations that have been created by VAST or VIA or Axiom, one of these private companies, and we're going to say we are in distress, and under the Outer Space Treaty, you have to render us all possible assistance, so please let us in. We're low on air. And if you don't have a lawyer inside your space station or call to the ground, you might say, uh-oh, I read the Outer Space Treaty in astronaut school, and they're right. But there is something called the Rescue and Return Agreement, and it is all about rescuing astronauts in distress. And the one provision that talks the most clearly about how you're going to assist people says that if there's someone in distress outside of anyone else's territory, which would thus include outer space, you have to notify that you have the government of whoever's in distress that they are out there in distress. And it doesn't say you have to let them in. And when you look at each subsequent provision about trying to help rescue and do this, you can start parsing the language saying, maybe I don't have to let them in. And if when you look out the hatch and you see one guy with a long mustache with an eye patch and another guy whose spacesuit ends in a peg leg, and they're using unauthorized frequencies, and we all know what that's called, that's pirate radio, you can say, I don't want to let these people in. Please help me, lawyer, help me. The lawyer will come to the rescue and say, under the Rescue and Return Agreement, which is very much specifically on point here, and we all know that the more precise law trumps the more vague law. You don't have to let them in, and we will not be in violation of any treaties. So those are my thoughts for you all. And I want to see Alan's slides of science fiction and pirates.
Although from what you said, that also means that space stations can protect themselves against vampires too.
Oh yeah, exactly.
Same logic.
Yeah. All right.
See, there's that fantasy again.
So, Alan, yes, if you'd care to give us a little briefing on space piracy in science fiction.
Sure.
Before we turn to the grim realities.
Okay. Well, some of it does have to do with grim realities. But we'll get there. space piracy stories began in science fiction. Well, it came as a sort of a subset of space opera, and the first space opera was published in 1898 with a novel called Edison's Conquest of Space. Shortly followed that was A Honeymoon in Space by George W. Griffiths, which is a interplanetary tour de force. But the first, as far as I can tell from my research, the first space piracy story came around 1930. And this was in Astounding, beginning, in fact, the third issue of Astounding, the March 1930 issue was the first of a serial. In fact, it was the first serial to be published in Brigands of the Moon by Ray Cummings. Ray Cummings is largely forgotten today, but he was a pioneer in his time, and he was trying to write for what was then a more realistic kind of science fiction. In fact, his stated purpose was that he was trying to write what he imagined would be a bestseller that somebody would be reading in the 21st century. In other words, a contemporary novel in the 21st century. And Brigands of the Moon was the first attempt of his to do this. And in this particular case, it was the first act of space piracy was a group of people infiltrating a space liner, a tourist liner, and hijacking this thing and taking it to the moon, and then holding the crew for the passengers and the crew for ransom. And they've been, in fact, doing this for a while. They have a secret pirate base on the lunar far side, and when our heroes get there, they find a number of missing ships that these people have hijacked. And this is the first act of space piracy. Next slide, please. The next one was soon followed by a novel. This is a reprint cover recently it's called The Moon Pirates by Neil R. Jones. And it was sort of the same thing. It was ships in space are being overtaken just like nautical pirates by ships being launched from a hidden pirate base on the moon that are going right up to them and using magnetic grapples and grabbing onto the other ship, and then the pirates come aboard and do the old pirate thing. Now, there's a number of reasons why that wouldn't work. It's very difficult to rendezvous with another craft. I mean, I was like, half expecting Jeff to kind of raise this point. It's very difficult to do this type of piracy. The other thing was that Jones made a major astronomical mistake in reading the book. He seemed to believe that all the moons and all the planets rotated. They were all lined up in a straight line from one to the other, and so then they all rotated at the same time in the same direction. So that if a ship was going to Mars or to Jupiter or whatever, they necessarily had to go past the moon, and so therefore these guys would waylay them on the way to the moon, and it doesn't really work like that. So it was a flawed novel in that respect. Next, please. Another work of the time, about a year later, was the Red Perils, which appeared in the November 1935 issue of Astounding. This is a major work by a formative writer with a very short career, Stanley G. Weinbaum. Weinbaum was, Isaac Asimov called him science fiction's first great loss. His first story was published in, I think in 1932, and he died in 1934. He had a very short career. Most of his work, including this one, was published posthumously. I mean, he was very prolific, and so after he died, there was loads of his stuff that was still out there waiting to be published, including his one and only novel. The Red Perils was sort of the same idea. It was, spaceships, pirate ship overtaking another craft and pulling it over and doing the pirate thing. And in fact, there's a pulp stereotype, a standard character, which is the lady pirate, the pirate queen, who always had flaming red hair. And so the Red Perils was this kind of pirate. But the interesting thing, one thing to think about a little bit that is as a possibility here, that something that could be in a way possible. You can see this in that illustration. The ship broadcast a kind of array that would immobilize the other ship to take it over. Now, a ray of this sort is unlikely, but I do think that if you're having actual space piracy, just like in space warfare, one of the first things that you would be trying to do is to basically hack into the other ship's computer system to try to immobilize. The first act of a space piracy just could be realistically the first act of space warfare. You try to take over the other person's control system. You try to shut them down so they can't get out of your way. They can't escape. They can't maneuver. And so Weinbaum may have been ahead of himself on that in that respect. Next one, please. Next slide, please. So space pirates began to proliferate, and it became sort of a standard trope of science fiction for quite a long time. And it all followed basically the same thing, where space pirates operate just like nautical pirates, except they are in space. I mean, here's sort of a typical cover of that time showing. This is my favorite idea of a space pirate. There, he actually looks like a former landlord I once had, and he's just about as welcome. Coming over and demanding the rent or booty or whatever. And so this was sort of the way space piracy, the form of it for a long time. Next, please. In the 50s, when we started having a lot of kid science fiction, young adult fiction, space pirates proliferated quite a bit. Tom Corbett was the big one of the first big science fiction franchises, I guess you could say. It was a radio show that morphed into a TV show that produced comic books and books like this. And so this is the second one on the trail of the space pirates. Again, same business. Space pirates looking the same way, acting the same way as nautical pirates did. Next slide, please. Isaac Asimov got into the game, though people didn't really know it at the time. He wrote a series of novels, young YA novels called the Lucky Star series, but they were under the pseudonym of Paul French. It wasn't until the books were reprinted in the 70s that it was generally known that this was Isaac Asimov writing under pseudonym. And Pirates of the Asteroids was a little more credible than most of the asteroid pirate stories or space pirate stories in the wild, because it was Isaac Asimov. He got his science right. But by the next slide, please. By the time we got to the end of the 50s, it was pretty much you can always tell when something's become a trope because it begins to generate parodies. So this is one, The Pirates of Assats by Murray Leinster. And you notice this space pirate has a slide rule in his mouth. Well, in this particular novel, this is a galactic society. In a galactic society, we have this one particular world where the only industry, it's a metal poor world. There's few resources, and so the only way that the people there can support themselves is through piracy. And they actually emulate the pirates of the Caribbean. They dress like them, they act like them, and so forth. So that might be. We were talking earlier about, Walt was talking a little earlier about people's how you support yourself and so forth. So this might be the answer. It may be that societies or colonies support themselves entirely by piracy. I mean, they raiding other ships, raiding other bases. You have to have a very well-developed society, starfaring civilization to be able to do something like that. But it does sort of answer it is one idea of where it goes on. Next, please. Here's the alternate cover for this. It was reprinted as a ace double, and Murray Donald Wollheim, the editor, often changed the titles of books if he didn't think readers would understand what the word ersatz meant. So he changed it to The Pirates of Zan. It's an Ed Enfruella cover. Next, please. Model builders even got in on the game. Revell Model Company reissued a couple of older kits and put it out there as a Space Cop and Space Pirate. I bring this one up. In fact, my other hobby, besides being a science fiction book and magazine collector, is I build rockets. So I actually have, if you can come back to me for a minute, please. There we go. So I actually have that model. If you look very closely, you can see the skull and crossbones on the wings, and also you have a shark mouth beneath it. But there's something I think that's kind of that's very plausible about this. And we were talking about stealth spacecraft, and so if you did have black painted spacecraft, this might be what something of this would look like. Yes, you'd have an enormous infrared signature that you'd have to mask in one way or the other. But how well would you see something like this coming at you? At least visually, you might not see it for a long time. You'd have to pick it up on some sort of you'd have to find a way of masking your infrared signature for it to work. The other thing about it is that now this was a reissue. What they did was, this is an old Croft Eric design for a space shuttle that he did in the early 1960s. That Revell remade into a model made into the space pirate ship. And as you notice, that it has a booster. Now we've actually have gotten to the place of reusable flyback boosters. So it is entirely possible, I think, that this might be a model for an actual, something like this could be a model for your actual ship, where you have a pirate ship that launches from some place on Earth, some location, and you have your ship descends to orbit, it departs with your booster comes back, it lands the way that SpaceX boosters do, and then your craft goes up, does whatever yo-ho-ho business it's going to do, and it comes back and lands either at the same place or at another location. So this might have been actually something that is possible. Back to slides, please. And we'll go to the next one after that. Next one, please. Now, of course, what was parody inevitably descends into farce, and so Lost in Space came along, and this was an episode from the first season called The Sky Parrot, and this kind of basically became the image of what everybody thought a space pirate would look like, and I think that one of the things that any discussion of this we're going to have to get past is basically getting past this stereotype. You know, you mentioned space pirates, and I think a lot of people, one way or the other, think of this. But as it just, you know, when something gets around for a while, I mean, you study science fiction and you see a pattern, and where something, an idea gets out there, and it generates the parody, then it becomes farce, and then it gets forgotten for a while. And then another set of writers come along and begin to look at this a little more seriously. They pick up the idea and say, what if this could actually work? Next slide, please. Now, one of those is a James Bond movie, You Only Live Twice. I'm sure you've all seen this. This is Spectre Blofeld builds a spacecraft that goes up, captures Gemini and also spacecraft, and also a Russian spacecraft, takes them back to Earth in this very unlikely plan to start World War III. God knows why. And again, you have a physical difficulty of being able to rendezvous two craft like this and be able to actually capture one or the other. Because, you know, the Gemini is moving too. But again, I kind of wonder if this is actually something on those lines could be done if you had a stationary spacecraft, like a space station, particularly a small space station. I'll get to that. This is something I want to discuss later on. Next question. Next slide, please. The first realistic work that I've been able to identify is this obscure novel that came out. It was in Venture Science Fiction in 1970, and it came out later on in paperback. It's become forgotten, but it's worth reading. And this is Hijack by Edward Wellen. Now, Edward Wellen was both a crime writer and a science fiction writer, and this is like a perfect fusion of the two. It's a little bit of farce to this, but it's basically the mafia, the New York crime family, stumbles upon these classified documents that's come out of I think it was NASA, that says that the sun has gone unstable, and it looks like it may be going nova in a certain number of years. This is why they discovered that the United States, this is the real reason why the United States is building a starship in orbit. So the mafia of these crime families, they don't want to fry. So they decide to hijack that starship. The book is very interesting because it actually, once you get past the sort of the tongue-in-cheek element to this, they actually show what a hijacking like this, how this might actually occur. Next slide, please. Here's an interior scene, interior illustration. This is a takeover of what was then called Cape Kennedy. This is Cape Kennedy being taken over by mafiosi soldiers posing as military soldiers. And so it goes through a whole step by step of an attempt to take over this craft, and it brings up something that I think it needs to be brought up. At least I think that most, at least in the near term, most attempts to commit space piracy are going to have to begin on the ground. I mean, the first steps will probably be ground-based in one way or the other. By the way, you should read the book. I'm not going to tell you, but it's got a terrific twist ending. You can get this book, and actually you can get all the other stories. If you go to the Internet Pulp Magazine Archive, which is archive.org/Pulp Magazine Archive, all one word, and you type in Venture Magazine, you can find this. You can download it for free. Worth reading. Same thing for the other stories that I just other pulp stories that I mentioned to you. They're all over there. But especially Hijack.
Alan, I think you ought to put those links in the chat for people.
I'll try to do that. Yeah, I've got this in here one way or the other. Next question. Next slide. In the 70s, we began to progress other realistic forms of it. The person who was really very good at this was Ben Bova. Ben took these scenarios very seriously. This was one of his best novels, Millennium, which was a Hugo nominee, I believe, in 1976, 1977. Millennium isn't a piracy novel per se. It's essentially about two rivals in space, U.S. and Russia, who both have semi-military bases on the moon. They discover that the U.S. has secretly built, against UN space law, a nuclear satellite platform or nuclear bomb platform in Earth orbit. And the two superpowers, the leaders of the two superpowers, get together and decide to take control of this thing. And in this is a pretty realistic depiction of how you could take over a space station. Ben was ahead of his time, I think, on this book. He missed the target about who our major adversary in space is going to be. He thought it was going to be Russia. Russia, well, they could still be, but Russia's kind of faded in the background. And in recent years, they've been replaced by China. But the questions are still very much there. Next slide. Now, this one was really, I'm very glad that I put this up here, and I'm also very glad that Walter brought up the question of privateers and the differences between the two. This novel by Ben, published in 1985, is about precisely that, privateers in space. And it's been brought up a couple of times that something like this would need billionaires. So the first privateer in this novel is a space billionaire, one of the first. His company is established not in the United States, but in Venezuela. And he decides Russia has taken over most of near space during this part, and is shut out the United States and just about everybody else. So he privately begins to work on behalf of another spacefaring power that's being shut out, Japan. Secretly hires him to commit acts of piracy, much the same way as the privateers did, against Russian spacecraft, in this case, asteroid mining. And so again, he took on the old idea of asteroid pirates and updated it, this time with near-Earth asteroids, the ones that are most likely to be utilized for resources. And he looked at this in a fairly realistic sort of a manner. Again, this is another book that's recommended. There we go, next slide. And of course, this guy named Steele came along in the early 90s. This was my third novel, Lunar Descent. It's not necessarily about space piracy. It's about a commercial base on the moon. But I did begin to wonder about, as I was researching this thing, I did wonder about resource allocation and how a company, a large space companies, may soft sell their resources unfairly or soft sell resources to one base at the expense of another one. And this is what happens here on this moon base. They need resources that are being diverted to a solar power satellite construction project in Clark orbit on Earth. And so they commit an act of space piracy by having orbital transfer vehicles, unmanned orbital transfer vehicles that are meant to go to Clark orbit stations are being diverted to the moon. And so I kind of figured out how this might work. And again, it all starts on Earth. I mean, where these things all this begins, it would take, even though the act is taking place in outer space, it probably would begin in some way or the other on Earth. And a lot of the background stuff would begin there before anything actually gets into outer space. And then finally, next slide, please. We have Jim's book, Corsair. And Jim, I'll let you talk about that.
Well, that one I came up with the brilliant idea of leaving the pirates back on the ground. So all of the space piracy is being done by unmanned spacecraft, which I have to say I think is an extremely likely thing, and probably, in fact, ought to be like one of our main focuses in this discussion. Thank you very much, Alan, for that historic science history
You're welcome.
background. And I thought we'd pivot now to talking about actual space piracy, acts of space piracy / privateering / terrorism that people might decide to commit or even be planning to commit as we speak. And I wanted to do this in sort of three tranches. The first would be the near future, between now and say 2030. So essentially with what we've got up there now and what we can do now, and how could you misuse it? Who would like to start? Anybody have a good juicy idea for crime in space to commit?
Well, if I just got.
I think Walter just was.
Okay, sure, go ahead.
Did you have something, Walter?
Yes, but I'll defer to Alan.
No, I mean he needs to.
No, go right ahead. I just got
Okay.
through talking, so go right ahead. I need to rest my
Okay.
voice.
Well, it occurs to me that we have all of these assets in space now, and no realistic way to defend them.
Hmm.
So that, say we are in a confrontation with North Korea, which doesn't have our technical resources, but they do have a nascent space program, and what they could do is send up a rocket to fire an enormous shotgun in the Clark orbit and basically knock out every satellite in the Clark orbit. Likely also to do this with in low Earth orbit with our communications and geosynchronous and location finding satellites. Suddenly the buzzword just flew out of my head. So, and there's nothing that can be done to prevent this.
Actually, it's been almost forgotten. In fact, it was very classified for a long time. The very first space station that was sent up, the Salyut, that
Yes.
the Russians sent up, we discovered many years later that it actually had a cannon aboard. They armed it with a gun for just that purpose, because they thought those bad old capitalist Americans would come up and take their space station. So I'm not sure how well that thing would have worked. It was allegedly a recoilless cannon. I don't think there's such thing as a recoilless weapon in outer space.
I was
So I'm not sure how well that would have worked.
Yeah.
And apparently also the crew, the captain himself carried a gun for just that same reason.
Alan, I was just recently reading about it. The cannon was taken off of one of their bomber designs, so it was an air-to-air combat weapon, but it was bolted on to the station, so that to aim it you would have to maneuver the whole station to point at
Yeah.
whatever you shoot at.
Yeah, I remember reading that too. Yeah.
I think this was kind of like malicious compliance on the part of whoever was actually building. It's like it says we got to put a gun on it.
Well,
And
the rationale I heard is much more benign. That the Russian, not for the cannon, that's obviously not benign, but the Russians carried rifles on their space stations because when they came back and landed in Siberia, they needed to be able to address threats from wolves and bears.
Which
So
did
it had
happen.
nothing to do with
yeah,
it.
still do.
Yes.
The Russians carry guns on their Soyuz capsules.
Yep.
Yes. So
Yeah, they and they had to use it. One time, one of those Soyuz capsules came down in Siberia, way offline, and those poor cosmonauts had to spend the night fending off within their capsule a wolf pack that actually was trying to get them. And I'm sure they were very glad to have that gun then.
this is a true story. Okay.
Yeah,
So
it is very true.
In the near term, I think you're not likely to see piracy of the sort that you see in science fiction, the buccaneers of the Caribbean taking over passenger liners or such. What
Right.
you are very likely to see are two types of piracy. One is holding things for ransom, saying, we have a weapon, we're going to destroy your very large object unless you pay 50 million crypto coins. The other thing is piracy of stealing satellites, not by physically going to the satellite, but by electronic hacking.
Right.
In general, pretty much everything in orbit has some amount of cryptography on the command system. Anybody can't just grab their radio telescope, send up a command to an Intelsat and say, well, this is mine now. But cryptography gets hacked.
note
You
that
could
both of
hack a satellite and say, the satellite is mine now.
Well, there was
those two go together too. Once you've hacked
Yeah.
the satellite, now you have a weapon to hold things for ransom.
And
And
there
now
was
now you also have a platform to spread whatever
Yes.
propaganda you want to steal.
there was the Ken MacLeod novel. I forget the name of it, but he had this whole system in place where private corporations had nukes on orbit, which violates the Outer Space Treaty, and they would use them like they had clients of nation states who would threaten other countries with them, and it was a horrible sort of weird mutual assured destruction administered by this private corporation. Where everyone's being threatened, so everyone behave.
Laura, here's something I was actually thinking about some time ago, even before this whole thing came up, and that was about. I mean, the main body of law is still. I mean, the base of it is still the UN Space Treaty, right? Everything kind of springs from that, but. How enforceable is that actually? I mean, if somebody wanted to put up a nuke in orbit now, if China decided they wanted to put a nuke in orbit, who could say no?
Well, so several things. I would
That's actually the Test Ban Treaty, not the Outer Space Treaty. But.
Right. I would dispute that everything springs from the Outer Space Treaty because, for us, everything springs from the Constitution. And we do have a huge body. We have space law here in this country that is mostly invisible to the general public. You've got the FAA regulating launch and reentry in spaceports. The FCC regulates satellite transmissions. NOAA regulates remote sensing. And so there's all sorts of rules that apply in space. All right, remind me of the rest of your question. I got hung up on that.
Well, if one country were to commit an act that would be in violation of either the test ban.
Oh, the enforceability, right.
Enforceability. How enforceable is that?
Well, so if it was another country, I think that we would have to turn to, the laws of war if someone was going to send up a nuke. And it's my understanding, and, Jeff, you probably know this better, that you can identify ICBM going up in the boost phase now. So that might be a very practical enforceability approach. If a private actor was doing something bad, as I think you were saying, things are ground-based for the immediate future, you go after their bank accounts.
Yeah.
They're all here on the ground. Whatever bad thing they're doing in space, you put them in jail, you fine them, you make them stop by controlling them on the ground.
Well, here's a scenario I've been thinking about, and this came out of um, this was an article that appeared in this issue of Ad Astra a couple of months ago, an article on private space stations that are being built or planned, because you have three of them were identified. Let me find my notes here. There are three of them that were identified in the in the article. There was one that was the Axiom space station. There's one. I think that's the one that's being. Here we go. Yeah, Axiom is one. The Star Lab. There's another one called Orbital Reef, and each of these are modular stations. 4 or 5, 2 to 4, sometimes as much as 5 modules. And these are small commercial stations, not anywhere near as big as the ISS, that would be put in low orbit. And now these things are supposed to be permanently manned, but I think it's more likely because it's so hard. ISS proved that it's so hard to keep people on a space station, day after day after day, week after week after week, month after month after month, that they're more likely to be man-tended, that we have temporary crews up there, which means that your space stations, these small stations, would be untended, unmanned for very long periods of time, which means that they would be vulnerable without anybody aboard. And the only watchdog that you would have would be ground tracking on Earth, Space Force or something like that. And a scenario that I could see is that if somebody, a private actor, had a reusable rocket, something that was built on the lines of, let's say, Blue Origin, that would be capable of sending up a capsule from a location that could be temporary. It doesn't necessarily have to be a permanent base. You could essentially find find a location in West Texas, Arizona, or somewhere, or alternately somewhere in Eastern Europe. Eastern Europe, anywhere that's on that equatorial line, if it's an equatorial orbit, and you send up something. You send up a capsule on a reusable booster. The booster comes back and lands where it took off from. Capsule goes up, docks at that space station. You time the launch so that you have to, for the minimum amount of chase time for the thing, that you could get up there and try to catch that thing in orbit. You dock with it, and you guys go aboard. And at which point, if there's stuff that the simplest thing to do, of course, is download everything that's on their computers. But the other thing is that if there's any experiments that have been left up there, any material that's up there, you grab it. You might even sabotage the module itself, deorbit the station, so that you leave and that thing loses orbit, fires engines, it loses orbit, it goes up and disintegrates in the atmosphere. Or even clip off. Yeah.
Alan, that touches on something which I would like to ask Laura about, which is, don't countries have a legal responsibility to control what is launched from their territory, so that, if you're doing this kind of,
Yes.
pirate launches, the country, you would have to choose a fairly lawless country to do it from,
Yes.
And it's hard to escape the US's long arm because you're a US citizen doing this bad thing that Alan is describing. And if you are a US citizen launching a rocket, you need an FAA license, regardless of where you are in the world.
These are pirates. They don't need no stinking licenses.
Of
Yeah, we
course
will
they're
assume
pirates,
that
but
they know that
but
they
it gives a
filled the
basis,
paperwork wrong, you know.
right? But it
Yeah.
gives a basis for the U.S. government to go after them and start fining them $100,000 per day, adjusted for inflation. And so you've got the ability to say we're going to stop you, from the legal authority to say we're going to stop you.
But what if this was somebody who's really is a pirate? They're lawless. They're doing this
Everything-
without authorization by their country.
Everything in space is being tracked.
Right.
You cannot
Jeff will
launch
find them.
without people knowing where you launched from. You can't recover your reusable spacecraft without people knowing where you landed it. These people will be tracked down instantly.
Well, they can be tracked down, but I'm not sure about instantly. I mean, if
Instantly.
you time this thing, I mean, I've actually been thinking about a story on these lines. If you time this thing, you could actually, you could set up a temporary launch base and have everything brought in there, and then you could be in and out of that location. The craft itself can be and the launch base can be in and out of there in the time it takes for the booster to go up, launch the capsule, and then come back down. At which point, everything begins to tear down. You put it back on the trucks. You port them out of there. And by the time the helicopters and the Marines and everybody else gets there, they just have a bunch of tire tracks.
Your typical orbital launch vehicle is a little big to carry away on a truck. And there are satellites that follow trucks.
Yeah,
Yes,
but
everybody's
how
gonna
many
know.
big trucks do we see out? But how many big trucks do we see out there on the road? You can hide these.
I would like to remind everyone that Elon Musk did in fact have a secret volcanic island base in the Pacific at one point, where he did all the early development for SpaceX.
Is that true?
I did wonder whether he was thinking along these lines,
But the FAA was issuing licenses, so it wasn't that secret.
I'd like to take this opportunity to move forward a little in time, because we're getting down to about like 10 minutes left. What about out through, the next 20 years beyond 2030, the next generation, if you will? What are some other kinds of, more futuristic space piracy that could really be accomplished? Jeff, you want to throw out some ideas?
Yeah, I was thinking about it. As I said, I've written a couple of stories about space piracy, trying to think out the question. And the first thing you have to answer is, what are they hijacking and why? So the background that I had is one in which there are habitats in space, asteroid mining habitats and other such things. And so the background I had is, well, there is one such habitat that decided they didn't want to pay off their investors. Their investors have invested billions, probably trillions of dollars, and it is a drain on their economy. So they went rogue. They said, we're independent now. Sorry, we disclaim we don't owe you anything. Oddly enough, very similar to the American Revolution, where taxes were the critical point. But then discover we can't make it alone. We actually need to have trade with the Earth and the solar system, which now we can't do because we are illegal. So they are basically become pirates because there are things that they need and can't get. So the proximate thing, of course, would be things like food, oxygen, volatile compounds like nitrogen, phosphorus.
This is kind of the situation that was with the Murray Leinster novel. Yeah.
Turns out that unlike The Expanse, once you get out beyond about the middle of the asteroid belt, there's plenty of water. So they probably will not be ice pirates, which is just as well, because that was actually really a terrible movie.
Yeah.
But you could imagine them hijacking food and and supplies, but more likely what they'll be hijacking is high-tech stuff because it's maybe possible to grow food and to make steel and to make bulk stuff, but making microchips could be very, very difficult. So they may be looking to hijack microchips. And of course, the whole point of this is they have a lot of problems maintaining themselves in secret. Uh, it's hard to hide in space. They have to hide their infrared signature. You can hide your infrared signature from a reasonable range of angles, but not from everywhere. But as long as you know where people are looking at you from, you can hide from those telescopes and those cameras. And as for the other one, you can't search the whole sky. You have to know where to look before you can find something. So that was my thinking.
Do you have any medium to long-term space piracy ideas?
What, me personally? When I become
I was asking Walter.
okay,
Oh.
Walter. Okay. Does he have personal?
I think the most likely scenario is the one I outlined earlier. That basically you have an established space fleet that loses its homeland for one reason or another and has to strike out on their own. So you know, and they can theoretically hold the entire Earth hostage, not just the satellites, not just the space habitats, but you know, they can say, you know, give us our daily bread, or we're going to drop a big rock on your biggest city. You know that. So that's one scenario that I've considered. That seems probably the best way that you can think of pirate fleets in space. But best way to get one.
You'd have to, if you wrote that story, Walter, you'd have to have an interesting character study of the captain, that he would go from being, you know, an above board astronaut to having this turn to evil, because they could just defect. I'm sure there'd be bidders for their services. Yes, we would like to buy your space fleet, and we'll pay you, not China.
Well, that's another interesting scenario. Yeah. In that case, you end up with space mercenaries, which is, you know, yet another trope of space opera.
Right. And we go back to Ken McLeod.
So. Despite what Robert Heinlein implied, dropping big rocks from space is hard. Because it takes a lot of delta V to move asteroids, and the ones that are easy to move are watched all the time. So probably they wouldn't be dropping big rocks. But habitats are very fragile. So.
But the thing is, those big rocks is that even though you'd require a lot of energy, a lot of delta V to get them going, once they get some inertia behind them, it's really hard to stop them.
The hard to stop and hard to start are the same things, of course. But
well, I've heard much about the rod of God, which would seem to be capable of causing a lot of mayhem on the cheap.
One thing which I was thinking about too is, it's not quite piracy, but it's close enough, is essentially claim jumping. If you're doing in situ resource extraction, and I want to make money doing resource extraction, why don't I just set up my resource extraction operation next to yours and steal the resources you're extracting?
Right.
If it's all automated, how can you tell, you know?
No. Yes, this is where you want to have principles of adverse possession in as a way of saying, this is my land, this is your land, good fences make good neighbors, stay away, and that includes going all the way down to the core. So no sneaking under, no tunneling. So,
well, that's more reasonable scenario, but the right way to do that is to wait until the resource has been extracted. You wait until they're about to launch it to wherever the customer is, and you take over that ship that's being launched and send the resource to where you want to send it instead of where they want to send it.
Then you're a real pirate.
That's classic piracy. Yeah. Of course, the problem is everybody can follow where you're going. So you have to have a good plan for how you grab that resource and distribute it where you want it to go and make money out of it.
it seems to me that these would all give a real boost to anybody who has a chunk of a failed state under their control, you know, like the police in Yemen or various groups in
Somalia.
Oh, the perfect place like this would be all of a sudden I can't remember the name of the country.
Kazakhstan?
Haiti.
Well,
Haiti, yes. That would be
Haiti's a perfect place to launch a rocket from. It's a failed state. I mean, the place is loaded with pirates already. Why not just bring it to the high-tech version?
Go all the way. Use the island of Tortuga. It's part of Haiti.
Okay.
I think we should probably wrap up. But thank you so much. This was really a great presentation. Thank you so much. We will be sending out a link to the recording in a couple days, and really appreciate everybody being here today. I certainly learned a lot. And if we didn't get to your question, we'll try and get back to you if we can. But stay tuned for the link, and hope to see you on future webinars with the Center for the Study of Space Crime, Piracy, and Governance. So thank you very much, everybody.
It's been a blast. Thank you.
Yeah,
thank you.
Coming.
Very good. Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.